August 19th, 1942. Dieppe, France. 6 in the morning. Private Thomas Wright pressed his body against the steel hull of the landing craft. He was 17 years old. The waves lifted the boat and dropped it with sickening rhythm. Cold salt spray hit his face. Around him, 30 men breathed in short, desperate gasps. The sound of the diesel engine mixed with the thunder of distant artillery. Through the gray morning mist, Tommy could see the beach ahead. Rows of concrete bunkers lined the shore like teeth. Machine gun nests pointed toward the water. Barbed wire stretched across the sand in thick, dark tangles. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's fortress. Waiting. Tommy gripped his rifle. His hands shook. He told himself it was the cold. He knew better. The boat's ramp hit the water. The sound of metal scraping stone cut through the engine noise. The sergeant screamed something. Tommy could not hear the words over the roar in his ears. The ramp dropped. Light poured in. And with it came the sound of machine guns. Bullets hit the water like rain on a metal roof. Men ahead of Tommy fell. One moment they were running. The next they were floating, red mixed with the gray water. Tommy's boots hit the beach. He ran. His best friend David Chen ran beside him. They had grown up together in Toronto, played hockey on frozen ponds, promised their mothers they would watch out for each other. The machine gun fire created a wall of sound. Tommy dove behind a concrete barrier. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked for David. David was still running, still exposed. Tommy screamed his name. The sound was lost in the chaos. Then David was down. Tommy crawled toward him. The sand was wet. Not from the ocean. David's eyes were open, looking at nothing. His hand still gripped his rifle. Tommy pulled him behind the barrier, shook him, called his name. David did not answer, would never answer again. The textbook said to wait, to consolidate, to establish a defensive position before advancing. Tommy and the surviving men waited. They waited for 3 minutes. They waited behind barriers and in craters. They waited while German gunners adjusted their aim. They waited while mortar rounds found their range. They waited because that is what the manual said to do. And while they waited, they died. By 6:45 in the morning, half of Tommy's unit was gone. By 7 orders came to retreat. Tommy pulled himself back into the water. The weight of his equipment tried to drag him down. 60 pounds of gear, soaked uniform, ammunition that would never be fired. He kicked, gasped, fought for the surface. Around him, men drowned, pulled under by the very equipment meant to save them. Tommy made it to a rescue boat. He did not remember how. One moment he was in the water. The next he was vomiting salt water onto wooden planks. Someone wrapped a blanket around him. Someone else pressed a flask to his lips. The liquid burned. He drank it anyway. Behind them, Dieppe burned. The smoke rose black against the morning sky. The sound of gunfire continued. Men were still dying on that beach, still following the manual, still waiting in the kill zone. September 1942, a hospital in southern England. White walls, white sheets, white bandages. Tommy lay in a bed with 40 other survivors. Some were missing limbs, some were missing minds, and all were missing friends. The numbers came in slowly, whispered by nurses, announced by doctors, written in newspapers that circulated through the ward. Of the 5,000 Canadian soldiers who landed at Dieppe, 68% became casualties. 3,367 men killed, wounded, or captured in 9 hours. Tommy was whole, physically. His body had no holes, no missing pieces. But at night he heard David calling his name, felt the weight of his friend's body as he pulled him across the sand, smelled the mixture of salt water and blood. He would wake up gasping, reaching for a rifle that was not there, fighting an enemy that lived only in his memory. The other survivors did not talk much, but their eyes spoke volumes. They all asked the same silent question. Why did I live when they died? There was no answer, only the empty space where friends used to be. In the common room, soldiers whispered. They said the planning was flawed, the intelligence was wrong, the air support was insufficient. They said many things, but one phrase repeated, spoken quietly, almost like a prayer. We followed the book. The book got us killed. One afternoon in October, a general visited the ward, Major General Robert Mackenzie. He was not there for ceremony, no cameras, no reporters. He walked between the beds, shook hands, asked questions, actually listened to the answers. When he reached Tommy's bed, Mackenzie sat down. He was 40 years old. His uniform was crisp but not flashy. His face showed lines of thought, not breeding. He looked like a man who solved problems, not a man who gave speeches. "Tell me what happened," Mackenzie said. "Not the official version. What you saw, what you felt." Tommy told him about the landing, about the wait, about David, about how every time they stopped to regroup, the Germans found them, picked them off, how the manual said to be careful, how being careful got everyone killed. Mackenzie listened, took notes, asked more questions. "How long were you in the kill zone? Where was the heaviest fire? When did you take the most casualties?" Tommy answered. Other soldiers nearby added their voices. A pattern emerged, a timeline written in blood and memory. The longest anyone stayed exposed and survived was 6 minutes. Most died in 3. The Germans needed about 2 minutes to adjust their fire. Anyone who stayed still for longer than that was a target. Mackenzie stayed for 3 hours, filled a notebook. When he left, Tommy felt something strange. Hope, maybe. Or just the feeling that someone was finally listening. That night, Mackenzie sat in his office. Maps of Dieppe covered his desk. Casualty reports, timeline analyses, weather data, intelligence assessments. He had read them all a dozen times. Now he was looking for what they did not say. The official report blamed equipment failures, poor intelligence, insufficient naval support. All true. But Mackenzie saw something else, a pattern in the timing. The longer soldiers stayed in the danger zone, the more they died. 3-minute intervals between landing waves meant isolated groups, easy targets, sitting ducks. He pulled out a calculator, started working through numbers. If the standard doctrine required 3 minutes between waves, that meant 20 waves per hour. But German response time to adjust fire was 2 minutes. That meant they could target and eliminate most of each wave before the next arrived. What if the waves came faster? What if instead of 3 minutes, they came every 30 seconds? That would be 120 waves per hour. The Germans could not possibly adjust fast enough. They would be overwhelmed, confused, unable to focus fire effectively. Mackenzie wrote the theory down, looked at it. It made mathematical sense. It violated everything the military taught, every principle of fire and maneuver, every lesson from every textbook. He thought about the men in the hospital, about Private Wright pulling his dead friend across the sand, about 3,367 casualties. Sometimes Mackenzie wrote in his journal, "The greatest mistake is doing what everyone agrees is right." November 1942 through March 1943. Mackenzie became obsessed. He studied every amphibious landing in military history, the Romans at Carthage, the Mongols crossing rivers, the British at Gallipoli, American operations in the Pacific. He looked for patterns, successes, failures. A pattern emerged. Successful assaults involved rapid, continuous pressure. The attackers gave defenders no time to organize, no time to think, no time to respond. Failed assaults involved pauses, consolidation, waiting, and while armies waited, defenders killed them. Gallipoli, 60,000 casualties. Why? Because British forces stopped to regroup, gave the Turks time to bring up reinforcements, time to prepare, time to kill. Tarawa, 1,000 Marines dead in 3 days. Why? Because the landing waves were too spread out. Japanese defenders could focus on isolated groups. But Iwo Jima, successful. Why? Because Marines kept pressure constant, gave the Japanese no breathing room, no chance to adapt. Mackenzie showed his research to colleagues. Their response was immediate and negative. "You are going to get men killed," one colonel said. "This is not how amphibious assaults work," said another. "The manual exists for a reason," Mackenzie replied simply. "The manual was written by men. Men can be wrong. At Dieppe, we followed the manual. 3,367 men died. In April 1943, Mackenzie received a promotion. Major General, commander of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. He was surprised. He knew his theories were controversial, knew that senior officers considered him difficult, unorthodox. Why promote him? The answer came when he read his orders. Prepare the division for an eventual invasion of France. In other words, train men for the next Dieppe, the job nobody wanted, the command that could end careers. An American liaison officer arrived in May, Colonel James Barrett. He was 45 years old, West Point graduate, veteran of North Africa. He had been assigned to observe and advise the Canadian preparations. His first assessment, written in a report to Washington, was blunt. These Canadians are green, led by a desk general with crazy ideas. Not promising. Mackenzie read the report. It had been leaked to him by a sympathetic staff officer. He said nothing, made no complaint, simply wrote in his own journal, "They will see." Mackenzie needed a team, people who could execute his vision, people who were not afraid to break the rules. He found them in unlikely places. Captain Michael Chen was a Chinese-Canadian engineer, 31 years old, brilliant with mechanics, innovative with design. He had developed modifications for tanks, mine-clearing flails, bridge layers, flamethrower systems. The British called them Hobart's funnies, practical innovations that solved real problems. Chen faced constant discrimination, whispers that he could not be trusted, comments about his loyalty, questions about whether a Chinese officer could lead Canadian men. Mackenzie did not care about any of that. He cared that Chen was smart and his designs worked. They met in a warehouse filled with modified tanks. Mackenzie walked around a flail tank. The rotating drum on the front would detonate mines, clear a path. Chen explained the mechanics, the gear ratios, the armor thickness, the expected effectiveness. "They say your design is impractical," Mackenzie said. "They say the same about your assault timing," Chen replied. "Maybe impractical is what we need," Mackenzie smiled. "When can you have 80 of these ready?" Chen looked at the warehouse, at the pile of parts, at the crews waiting for orders. "Give me 6 months. You have 4. Chen nodded. "Then we work fast." Mackenzie also recruited Private Tommy Wright. The soldier was hesitant. "Sir, I froze at Dieppe. I am not hero material." Mackenzie looked at him. "I do not need heroes. I need survivors who remember what failure feels like." "Can you train men not to make the same mistakes?" Tommy thought about David, about the beach, about the waiting that killed everyone. "Yes, sir. I can do that." Through the summer and fall of 1943, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division trained. They practiced landing from boats, running across open ground, advancing under fire. But they did it differently, faster, without the pauses, without the consolidation. Boat after boat, wave after wave, 30 seconds apart, never stopping. The men hated it at first. Every instinct screamed to take cover, to wait, to be careful. Mackenzie pushed them to ignore those instincts. "The danger zone is not a place to be careful," he repeated. "It is a place to run through as fast as possible." Some soldiers thought he was crazy, some were terrified. But they remembered Dieppe. They remembered the men who died doing it the old way. They trusted that maybe, just maybe, there was a better approach. Colonel Barrett watched the training with skepticism. He filed reports to Washington. "The Canadian general insists on landing intervals of 30 seconds. This violates basic principles. Formations will collapse. Boats will collide. It will be chaos." But Barrett also noted something else. The Canadian soldiers believed in their commander. They trained with intensity, with purpose. Whatever Mackenzie lacked in conventional wisdom, he made up for in conviction. And in war, conviction mattered. January 1944, Allied headquarters in London, a massive operations room. Maps covered the walls. Models of the French coast filled tables. Generals and admirals from America, Britain, and Canada gathered to finalize plans for the invasion. Mackenzie presented his momentum doctrine. He used charts, showed calculations, compared Dieppe timing with his proposed timing, demonstrated mathematically how faster waves would overwhelm German defenses. The room was silent as he spoke, then erupted the moment he finished. American General Omar Bradley stood. "General Mackenzie, this violates every principle of fire and maneuver we teach at West Point. Your formations will break down. Your men will bunch up. It will be a disaster." A British admiral added his voice. "Your boats will collide. You are asking for chaos in the most critical phase of the invasion. This is irresponsible." Colonel Barrett stood as well. "I must concur with the assessment that this approach is too risky. The Canadian forces lacked the discipline to execute such a complex modification. The criticism continued, voice after voice, all saying the same thing: too risky, too unorthodox, too dangerous. Mackenzie stood at the front of the room, calm, waiting. When the voices quieted, he spoke. With respect, sirs, Dieppe was also risky. Following doctrine got 68% of my countrymen killed. I am willing to try something new. The silence that followed was different, heavier, because everyone in that room had read the Dieppe reports. Everyone knew the cost of failure. Admiral Percy Nelson stood. He was 58 years old. Head of the Royal Canadian Navy, a man of few words but deep thought. I have also reviewed the Dieppe reports. I have studied General Mackenzie's analysis. His mathematics are sound. His logic is compelling. I support this plan. The room erupted again. Arguments, counter-arguments, heated debate. Finally, the Supreme Commander made his decision. Permission granted, the Canadians would use their modified assault doctrine, but then came the catch. You will be assigned Juno Beach, the most heavily defended sector. 21,000 German defenders, concrete bunkers 8 feet thick, 88mm guns. If your theory is wrong, General Mackenzie, you will not have a second chance. Mackenzie nodded. Understood, sir. Barrett watched him, saw no fear in his eyes, no doubt, just grim determination. Later, Barrett would write in his journal, he either believes completely or he is the best actor I have ever seen. For his men's sake, I hope it is belief. February through May 1944. The training intensified. Every day, every night. Landing drills, live fire exercises. Chen's modified tanks integrated with infantry movements. Everything practiced until it became instinct. Mackenzie watched his men, watched them transform from cautious soldiers into aggressive assault troops. He felt pride and terror, because he knew that if he was wrong, he would send 14,000 men to their deaths. One night alone in his quarters, Mackenzie wrote a letter to his wife. If I am wrong, I will have sent 14,000 men to their deaths. But if I do nothing, if I follow the old ways, I know what happens. I have seen it. I have visited the men in the hospital. I have read the casualty reports. 3,367 times he sealed the letter. Did not send it, could not burden her with his doubts. Colonel Barrett visited that same evening, knocked on Mackenzie's door, entered without waiting for an answer. The two men had developed an uneasy respect. Barrett still thought the plan was risky, but he had stopped calling Mackenzie crazy. Off the record, General Barrett said, I hope you are right, because if you are not, this will be the end of more than your career. Mackenzie poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Barrett. I am not thinking about my career, Colonel. I am thinking about the 3,367 men who died at Dieppe because we were too careful. And what if your men die because you are too reckless? Then at least they will die, moving forward, not huddled on a beach waiting to be slaughtered. Barrett drank his whiskey, studied the Canadian general. You really believe that, don't you? I have to, Mackenzie said. Because if I don't, then I am just sending boys to die for nothing. June 4th, 1944, the invasion was delayed. Weather, heavy storms in the Channel. The soldiers were already loaded on ships, confined, waiting. The anxiety built like steam in a closed container. Tommy sat with his unit in the hold of a transport ship. Around him, men checked equipment, wrote letters, some prayed. Others just stared at nothing. 2 years ago, Tommy had been in another ship, heading toward another beach. He had watched David check his rifle, joke about what they would do after the war. Make plans that would never happen. Tommy pulled out paper, started writing to his mother. If something happens to me, know that this time we have a plan. Last time we did not. Last time we followed the book and the book was wrong. This time we are doing something different. I do not know if it will work, but I know the old way did not. He did not mention David, did not need to. She knew. Everyone knew. 3,367 families knew. Captain Chen worked in the tank deck, checking each of his 80 modified vehicles, mine flails, bridge layers, flamethrower tanks. The Americans had refused most of them for Omaha and Utah beaches, called them unnecessary. Chen had taken everyone he could get. His crews were mostly Chinese-Canadian. Like him, they faced discrimination. Questions about loyalty, doubts about capability. But they were good, better than good. They knew these machines like extensions of their own bodies. One of his gunners approached. "Sir, some of the infantry, they do not trust a Chinese officer." Chen tightened a bolt on a flail mechanism. "Then we show them what we can do. These machines will save lives tomorrow." The gunner nodded, but Chen saw the doubt in his eyes. Not doubt about the machines, doubt about whether being good would ever be good enough. Whether being Canadian would ever override being Chinese. Chen thought, if this works, maybe they will finally see us as Canadian. Not Chinese, just Canadian. June 5th, 1944, 6:00 in the evening. Final intelligence briefing. The commanders gathered in the operations room. Maps of Juno Beach spread across tables. Aerial photographs, coastal defense diagrams, numbers that told a terrifying story. 21,000 German defenders. Concrete bunkers 8 feet thick. 88mm guns that could punch through tank armor. Mortars, machine guns. Rifle positions covering every inch of sand. 4 years of preparation. The Germans called it the Atlantic Wall. They believed it was unbreakable. One officer muttered under his breath, "This is worse than Dieppe." Mackenzie heard him, addressed the room. "Gentlemen, the Germans have prepared for us to come slowly, carefully, by the book. We are going to do the opposite." He pointed to the timeline. "Speed is survival. Momentum is armor. Every second you hesitate is a second they have to kill you. You have trained for this. You know what to do. Now we do it." The briefing ended. The commanders dispersed. Mackenzie and Nelson stood alone in the room, looking at the maps, at the numbers, at the impossible task ahead. Robert Nelson said quietly, "I have staked my career on your theory." "I know," Mackenzie replied. "I am sorry for that. Do not be. If you are right, you will change warfare forever. If you are wrong, well, we will both be remembered, just differently." They shared a drink. Two old friends. One of them might be court-martialed within 41 hours. The other would stand beside him, either way. Elsewhere on the ship, Tommy gathered with other Dieppe survivors. There were 15 of them in his unit, men who had been there, who knew what failure looked like, tasted like, felt like. One of them spoke, his voice shook. "I cannot do this again. I cannot go back to that beach." Tommy looked at him, at all of them. "That is why we are doing it differently this time. No more waiting, no more being careful. We run through hell, not pause in it." You believe that Tommy thought about David, about Mackenzie, about 4 months of training that felt wrong but made sense. I have to. In his workshop below deck, Chen made final adjustments to his lead tank. A flail tank, the first one that would hit the beach. The one that would clear the mines, create the path. He had personally supervised every modification, tested every mechanism. This machine would work. It had to work. His crew chief approached. "Captain, the men wanted me to tell you, whatever happens tomorrow, we are proud to serve with you." Chen felt his throat tighten. "Thank you. But tomorrow let us show them why they should be proud, not just tell them." On the German side of the channel, Colonel Klaus Richter studied his own maps. He commanded the 716th Infantry Division, the force defending Juno Beach. His intelligence had identified the Canadian forces. He remembered Dieppe, remembered how the Canadians had attacked, how they had been slaughtered. He issued orders to his men. The Canadians will come carefully this time. They learned their lesson. Position machine guns for 3-minute interval defense. Standard protocol. We crushed them once. We will crush them again. Richter was confident. His men were well trained, well supplied, well positioned. The Atlantic Wall had never been breached, would never be breached. This was Hitler's fortress, and it would hold. Neither commander knew what the other was planning. The Germans prepared for a slow assault. The Canadians prepared for a fast assault. Two theories, two plans, two visions of how the battle would unfold. Only one could be right. June 5th, 1944. 11th hour at night. Mackenzie could not sleep. He walked the deck of the command ship. The night was dark, cloudy. The water below was black, invisible except for the white foam of the wake. He passed groups of soldiers. They sat on the deck, checked equipment, talked in low voices. He heard fragments of conversations. "My brother died at Dieppe. We all lost someone. That is why we are here. You think the general's plan will work? It has to, because the old way did not. Mackenzie kept walking, did not interrupt. These men needed to talk, needed to process, needed to prepare in their own ways. He could not help them with that, could only give them a plan that might keep them alive. Back in his cabin, Mackenzie pulled out two photographs. The first showed Dieppe Beach, covered with Canadian dead. Bodies in the surf, on the sand, floating in the water. 3,367 of them. The second photograph showed his officers before Dieppe. 23 men, smiling, confident, ready. Mackenzie had circled the faces of those who did not return. 16 circles, 16 men who followed the manual and died for it. He placed both photographs on his desk, looked at them for a long time, then pulled out his journal, wrote one final entry before the invasion. June 6, 1904. Either I vindicate these men, or I join them. He closed the journal, turned off the light, lay down but did not sleep. Outside, the ships moved through the darkness, heading toward France, heading toward Juno Beach, heading toward the moment that would prove him right or condemn him forever. Across the fleet, 14,000 Canadian soldiers prepared for dawn. Some slept, some prayed, some wrote letters they hoped would never be sent. All of them knew that tomorrow would be different, that their general had given them a new way to fight. Whether that way would save them or kill them, they would learn in a few hours. At 7:45 in the morning, the world would learn which. June 6, 1944. 7:45 in the morning. The English Channel. The landing craft cut through 10-foot waves. Inside, Tommy Wright gripped his rifle so hard his knuckles turned white. Around him, 30 men sat in silence. The only sounds were the diesel engine and the waves crashing against the steel hull. Through the gray fog ahead, he could see other boats, dozens of them, hundreds, all heading toward the same strip of sand. This was different from Dieppe. At Dieppe, the boats had been spaced apart, 3 minutes between each wave. Tommy remembered watching the boat ahead disappear into the smoke, waiting, counting, wondering if he would ever see those men again. He never did. Today he could see the boat ahead, could almost reach out and touch it, and behind him another boat followed just as close, 30 seconds apart. Mackenzie's theory made real. Tommy did not know if it would work, but he knew the old way had not. On the command ship, Mackenzie stood with binoculars pressed to his eyes. Beside him, Colonel Barrett watched the same scene. The gray ocean, the gray ski, the dark line of the French coast emerging from the fog, and between them, waves of landing craft moving forward like a mechanical tide. General Barrett said, "It is not too late to adjust the timing." Mackenzie lowered his binoculars, looked at the American colonel. "Yes, it is, for all of us." At 7:50, the German machine guns opened fire. The sound carried across the water. A rattling thunder that never stopped. Tracer rounds lit up the fog like deadly fireflies. Red streaks cutting through gray. Tommy watched them arc overhead, saw them splash into the water ahead. "Closer, closer," Barrett whispered. "Jesus Christ." Mackenzie said nothing, just watched. This was the moment. Either his theory worked or 14,000 men were heading into a slaughter worse than Dieppe. There was no middle ground, no partial success, just victory or catastrophe. 7:55 in the morning. The first wave hit the beach. The Regina Rifles, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. They came from the Canadian prairie, farm boys and factory workers, men who knew hard work and harder winters. The ramps dropped. The machine guns found them immediately. Men fell. Explosions threw up towers of sand and water. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar that made thinking impossible. But the Canadians did not stop, did not take cover, ran forward through the smoke and fire and death. 30 seconds later, Tommy's boat hit the sand. The ramp dropped. Light and sound poured in. Tommy ran. His boots hit water. Then Guan. 60 pounds of equipment weighed him down. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. But he ran, kept running, did not look left or right, just forward, always forward. He saw the men from the first wave ahead, already 50 yards inland, already past the waterline. The German machine gunners were tracking them, trying to aim, but before they could focus, Tommy's wave was past them too. And behind Tommy, another wave was landing. And another, and another, the beach flooded with men. Not in isolated groups, in one continuous stream, like a river of soldiers flowing inland. Never stopping, never slowing. A German machine gunner in a concrete bunker tried to target the attackers, aimed at one group, but before he could fire more than a few rounds, they were past him and new targets were already there. He swung his gun, fired, swung again. Could not keep up. There were too many, moving too fast, coming too quickly. He screamed in frustration. Was this? What is this? At exactly 8:00 in the morning, Captain Chen's modified tanks rolled off their landing craft. The first was a flail tank, two massive rotating drums on the front. As the tank moved forward, the drums spun. Chains attached to the drums beat the ground. Every mine they hit exploded. The sound was like continuous thunder. Sand and shrapnel flew up, but behind the destruction was a clear path. Safe, mine-free. The infantry followed immediately, running through the paths the tanks created. The Germans had spent 4 years planting those mines. Chen's tanks cleared them in 90 seconds. The second wave of tanks were bridge layers. They carried massive bundles of logs and steel. When they reached anti-tank ditches, they dropped their loads, created instant bridges. Armor rolled across. The obstacles the Germans thought would stop them for hours were crossed in minutes. Then came the flamethrower tanks. They stopped in front of concrete bunkers, fired streams of liquid fire through the gun ports. The screams from inside were brief, terrible, final. German defenders who had never seen these machines before, stared in shock. Was this? What are these things? Where did they come from? They had prepared for regular tanks, regular infantry, regular assaults. This was something else, something new, something terrifying. On the American command ships, naval observers watched through binoculars. One grabbed his radio. Sir, the Canadians have achieved breakthrough 15 minutes after landing. The voice on the other end was skeptical. Confirm that report. Confirmed, sir. They are already penetrating inland, using specialized armor we have never seen. Barrett stood beside Mackenzie, watched the impossible happen. The Canadians were not just landing. They were advancing, rapidly. The beach that was supposed to be the most dangerous was becoming a highway. He thought about his reports, his warnings, his certainty that this would fail. He had been wrong. At 8:15, forward scouts sent back reports, 2 miles inland. The words crackled over the radio. Mackenzie heard them, did not react, did not smile, just nodded once. It was working, so far. But on Omaha Beach, the news was different. American troops were pinned at the waterline. Bodies floated in the surf. Medics worked frantically. Officers called for more artillery support, more airstrikes, anything to break the German defenses. At Utah Beach, the Americans had made progress, but slow progress, careful progress, following the doctrine. 3 minutes between waves, consolidation, establishing defensive positions before advancing. By the book. The Canadians at Juno Beach had already gone twice as far in half the time. Bradley stood on the deck of the USS Augusta, his command ship. He was one of the most experienced American commanders, had planned operations in North Africa, in Sicily, knew amphibious warfare as well as anyone alive, and he was watching something he had never seen before. The Canadians were not just holding their beachhead, they were racing inland. Their tanks were already disappearing into the French countryside. Supply vehicles were moving freely on the beach. The Germans were retreating. Bradley shook his head slowly, lowered his binoculars, turned to his staff officers. Get me every report on what the Canadians are doing, every detail. I want to know exactly how they are achieving this. Sir, an aide asked. Should we adjust our tactics? Bradley looked back at Omaha Beach, at the smoke and fire and chaos, in the middle of an assault. We cannot. But take notes, lots of notes. At 8:30, Canadian engineers reported 6 separate paths cleared through the German defenses. Bangalore torpedoes had blown up barbed wire. Satchel charges had destroyed bunkers. White tape marked the safe routes. More troops poured through. More tanks. More supplies. The flow never stopped. Chen's modified tanks had done their job. 70% of the German fortifications in the immediate landing zone were already destroyed or abandoned. The Atlantic Wall had a hole in it, and that hole was getting bigger. Admiral Nelson watched from his ship with a grim smile. British admirals had called Mackenzie's plan reckless. American generals had said it would fail. But Nelson had studied the same reports Mackenzie had studied, had reached the same conclusions. Speed was survival. Hesitation was death. Now watching the Canadians surge inland, he knew he had been right to support his friend, right to stake his career on an unorthodox theory. The mathematics had been sound, the logic compelling, and most importantly, it was working. At 8:45, the Regina Rifles reached the center of Cours-sur-le-Sommer. The town had strong German defenses. Concrete bunkers covered the streets. Snipers hid in buildings. Machine gun nests protected every intersection. Standard doctrine said to surround the town. Clear it building by building. Methodically. Carefully. The Regina Rifles did not do that. They charged straight through the main street. Tanks firing, infantry running behind. Germans appeared in windows, were cut down, tried to set up defensive positions, were overrun before they could shoot. The speed was overwhelming, the aggression shocking. Tommy was in the middle of it, running through streets he had never seen, in a town he could not pronounce, beside men whose names he barely knew. Bullets cracked past his head, explosions shook the buildings. Dust and smoke made it hard to see, but he kept moving. Because stopping meant dying, and he had promised himself at Dieppe that he would never stop again. A German soldier appeared in a doorway. Young, maybe 18, raised his hands, tried to surrender. Tommy ran past him. No time, keep moving. Someone else would handle prisoners. His job was forward, always forward. The sound was incredible. Tank engines roaring, rifle fire cracking, explosions echoing off stone buildings. German artillery shells screaming overhead. The smell of cordite and burning wood filled the air. Dust choked his throat, made his eyes water. But Tommy kept running. Officers shouted orders. Sergeants pushed men forward. Nobody stopped. Nobody paused. This was what they had trained for. 4 months of practice. Of running when instinct said take cover. Of pushing when logic said consolidate. Of trusting Mackenzie's theory more than their own fear. Major Richter stood in his command post. Maps and radios and desperate officers. Reports were coming in, fragmentary, confusing, contradictory. The Canadians were here, no there, no everywhere. Defenses were falling, units were surrendering. The line was breaking. This was not supposed to happen. He had prepared for a slow assault, for pauses, for time to regroup and counterattack. But the Canadians were not giving him time. Every attempt to establish a new defensive line failed because they were already there, already past him, already moving on to the next objective. They are not following doctrine, an officer reported. They are just pushing forward. No organization, no formation, just momentum. Richter tried to think, tried to adapt, but adaptation required time, and time was something the Canadians would not give him. By 9:00, something remarkable was happening. The German 716th Infantry Division was collapsing, not slowly, not in good order, collapsing. Individual soldiers threw down their weapons, raised their hands, then squads, then platoons. The continuous Canadian assault gave them no time to regroup, no time to reorganize. Every time they tried to make a stand, Canadian tanks and infantry were already on top of them. Mackenzie received the report, enemy resistance fragmenting. He allowed himself a small breath, not celebration, just acknowledgement. It was working. Barrett stood beside him, silent for a long moment, then spoke. Your assessment was correct, General. The words seemed to pain him. God help me, you were right. Mackenzie looked at the American colonel, saw something in his eyes, not just respect, relief. Despite his skepticism, Barrett had not wanted Mackenzie to fail, had not wanted to watch another Dieppe. Nobody did. I will need to report this to General Bradley, Barrett said. Tell him we are not stopping, Mackenzie replied. By 9:30, Canadian forward positions were 5 miles inland. They had broken completely through the Atlantic Wall, had captured or destroyed more than 200 German fortifications, and their casualties, while significant, were running at about half what the planners had predicted, 30% instead of 60. The aggressive approach that everyone said would cause massive losses was actually saving lives, because the longer you stayed in the kill zone, the more you died. Mackenzie's theory was not just tactically sound, it was mathematically proven, in blood and survival. At 10,000, Varsity engineers began setting up temporary bridges over the Suez River. This river ran behind Juno Beach, a natural obstacle. The Germans had expected it to slow the Allied advance for at least a full day, maybe longer. The Canadians reached it in under 3 hours. Chen's bridge laying tanks moved into position. Crews worked with practiced efficiency, dropped the bundles of logs and steel, secured them. Within 40 minutes, infantry and regular tanks were crossing. The obstacle that should have stopped them barely slowed them down. A German observer watched through binoculars, radioed back to command. They are crossing the river. They have been ashore for less than 3 hours. The voice on the other end did not believe him. That is impossible. The observer kept watching. I am looking at it right now. Tanks, infantry, trucks, all crossing. It is happening. By 11:00 in the morning, 21,400 Canadian troops had landed on Juno Beach. The sector that was supposed to be the hardest had become a breakthrough point. The sector American commanders had worried about was now advancing faster than any other Allied force. And watching from command posts, American and British generals were realizing something. The Canadians knew something they did not. But then the situation changed. At 11:15, the German 21st Panzer Division arrived. Powerful Mark IV tanks, experienced crews, veterans of North Africa and the Eastern Front. They had been held in reserve, waiting for exactly this moment, to counterattack, to drive the invaders back into the sea. The German general commanding them was confident. We will crush them. They have overextended. Scattered. We will cut them off and destroy them. The panzers attacked near the village of Carpiquet, came in force. Their 88mm guns could destroy any Allied tank at long range. Their armor was thick, well-designed. They represented the best Germany had. Initial contact was violent. German tanks fired from range. Allied tanks exploded. Infantry took cover. The Canadian advance paused. For the first time all morning, they stopped moving forward. Mackenzie watched from his command ship, saw the change in the reports. No, 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 do not stop, do not consolidate. He knew what would happen if they paused. Knew from Dieppe, knew from every failed assault in history. The moment you stop, you die. The moment you consolidate, you lose momentum. And momentum was everything. He grabbed the radio, called forward commanders. Resume advance immediately. Sir, came the reply. We need to secure our flanks. The German armor is hitting us hard. Negative. Forward momentum. Now. That is an order. There was a pause. Mackenzie could hear the sounds of battle through the radio. Explosions, gunfire, engines. Then the commander replied, Understood, sir. Resuming advance. It was a gamble, maybe the biggest gamble of the day. To advance while under attack from superior armor violated every tactical principle. But Mackenzie knew that following principles was how you lost battles. Dieppe had proven that. Chen called in naval artillery support. The British warships offshore responded immediately. Massive guns that could hit targets miles inland. Shells the size of cars screaming through the sky. The explosions walked across the German tank positions. Some panzers were destroyed, others damaged. All were forced to move, to retreat, to lose their own momentum. And while the Germans were pulling back, the Canadians pushed forward. Tommy's unit was ordered to advance, under fire. With German tanks nearby, every instinct screamed to dig in, to take cover, to wait for support. But Tommy remembered Dieppe, remembered what waiting had cost. We move, he told his squad. They are crazy, one soldier said. We should dig in. Tommy looked at him. Remember Dieppe, what happened when we stopped silence? Everyone in the squad was a Dieppe veteran. They all remembered. We moved, Tommy repeated. The unit pushed forward under fire. It was chaos. Terrifying. Wrong. But it worked, because the German tanks could not establish a defensive line when their targets would not stay still. could not focus fire effectively when the Canadians kept advancing. The fighting was brutal, confused, desperate. But by noon, the German counterattack had fizzled out. Mackenzie wrote in his journal later, 11:30. The moment I thought we had lost it all, and then the men, blessed them, they trusted the plan more than I did. At 12:30, something unprecedented happened. A German officer approached Canadian lines under a white flag. He was a major in the 716th Infantry Division. Through an interpreter, he said he wanted to discuss terms. The Canadian commander he met with was surprised. Surrender negotiations usually took days, sometimes weeks. The major explained his entire regiment wanted to surrender. More than 800 men. They had been overwhelmed by the Canadian assault, had never seen such aggression. We have fought British and American forces before, he said through the interpreter. But this is different. You attack like men possessed. The surrender was not isolated. Throughout the afternoon, German units across the Juno sector began giving up. By 2:00, more than 2,000 German soldiers had surrendered to Canadian forces. Entire defensive positions were being abandoned. The 716th Infantry Division, which was supposed to hold the coast for days, was falling apart in hours. British forces on neighboring beaches noticed the Canadian success, tried to adjust their tactics. But changing plans in the middle of battle was not easy. The British had trained for months using conventional methods. Their officers knew those methods. Their soldiers expected them. Trying to suddenly adopt Canadian-style aggressive momentum caused confusion in some units. It worked better when British commanders simply told their troops to keep up with the Canadians pushing on their flanks. Do not let the Canadians get ahead of you. Match their pace. Maintain contact. Simple orders. Effective results. By 2:00 in the afternoon, the full scale of Canadian success was becoming apparent to everyone. American General Omar Bradley stood on the deck of the USS Augusta, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the Canadian sector. He had been skeptical before D-Day, had thought their aggressive approach was naive. Now he was not so sure. He lowered his binoculars, turned to his staff officers. The Canadians have just rewritten the book on amphibious assault. We need to understand how. Send observers immediately. At 3:00, Mackenzie addressed his senior officers via radio. Gentlemen, you have proven that courage and innovation can overcome impossible odds. But more importantly, you have proven that doctrine is not destiny. We will remember Dieppe, but we will not repeat it. A moment later, a new report came in. German Major Richter was requesting to surrender personally, with his entire command staff. Barrett was present when Richter arrived. The German officer looked exhausted, defeated. Through an interpreter, he spoke to Mackenzie. You fought unlike anyone we have faced. Mackenzie replied simply, we fought like men who had something to prove. Richter nodded slowly. You proved it. More German units surrendered throughout the afternoon. By 4:00 total, German prisoners exceeded 2,000. The Atlantic Wall, which Hitler had boasted was impregnable, had a 9-mile-wide hole punched through it. At 4:30, Chen stood in a temporary maintenance area. His modified tanks were being refueled, rearmed, prepared for the next phase. An American tank commander approached. Captain, we would like to requisition some of your equipment. Chen looked at him. I thought you said Hobart's funnies were unnecessary contraptions. The American had the grace to look embarrassed. We were wrong. Can you teach us how to use them? Chen smiled. Of course. That is what allies do. Later, Chen gathered his crew. Today we proved something. Not just about tactics, about who we are. They saw us as different. Today we showed them different is strength. His Chinese-Canadian gunner nodded, understanding without words. Tommy found time to write a letter. Sat on the ground with paper and pencil. Around him, soldiers rested, ate, checked wounds. The battle was not over. Would not be over for a long time. But this day was ending, and he had survived. Dear Mother, he wrote, I made it. We made it. Dieppe haunted us, but it did not defeat us. They said we were colonial troops, not real soldiers. Today we showed them what colonial means. It means we remember our failures. It means we learn. It means when they say it cannot be done, we do it anyway. I am alive because General Mackenzie believed in us more than he believed in the manual. I do not know what tomorrow brings, but today we won, and that has to be enough. He sealed the letter, looked out at the French countryside. First peaceful moment all day. He thought about David, about the friend who died at Dieppe. Wished he could tell him. We made it, David. We finally made it. At 6:30 in the evening, the sun began to set over Normandy. Statistics were compiled, reports written. The numbers told an incredible story. Juno Beach, 9 miles inland. Deepest penetration of any Allied force on D-Day. 340 of 574 German fortifications neutralized. More than 2,000 German prisoners. Casualties 30 to 35%. Half what was predicted. Compared to Omaha Beach, 5 miles inland, 40% casualties, still fighting at the waterline at noon. Compared to Utah Beach, 6 miles inland, 25% casualties, but lightest resistance of any beach. The Canadians had faced the heaviest defenses, advanced the farthest, lost the fewest relative to what they faced. Mackenzie's theory was proven, not in simulation, not in theory, in blood and sand and survival. Barrett filed his report to Bradley. Sir, the Canadians have changed amphibious warfare. We need to learn from them. Quickly. Bradley read the report, nodded. Then we will. As darkness fell, Tommy visited the medical tent. Wounded comrades lay on stretchers. Some would live, some would not. War took its price, even in victory. One soldier looked up at him. Was it worth it? Tommy looked at French civilians bringing food and flowers, looked at the Canadian flag flying over a liberated town, looked at his own hands, shaking but alive. Yeah, it was worth it, but his internal voice added, does not mean it did not cost everything. Mackenzie stood on the deck of his command ship, watching the sunset over France. 14,000 men had trusted him. 4,000 had been wounded or killed. 10,000 had survived because of a theory that violated every rule. He thought about Dieppe, about the 3,367 who died following the book. Today they had proven the book wrong, but the price was still high, would always be high. Nelson joined him. They stood in silence, watching the light fade. We won, Nelson said. We survived, Mackenzie corrected. Tomorrow we have to do it again. And they would, because this was just the beginning. June 6, 1904 was one day. The war would continue. The fighting would continue. Mackenzie's tactics had worked once. Now they would have to prove they could work again. But tonight, for just a moment, it was enough to know that courage combined with innovation had overcome impossible odds. That questioning authority had saved lives. That being underestimated had become the greatest weapon of all. The Canadians at Juno Beach had done more than take a beach. They had proven that doctrine was not destiny, that sometimes the right answer comes from the least expected place, that having something to prove can change the course of history. As the stars came out over Normandy, 14,000 tired soldiers prepared for tomorrow. They had won today. That would have to be enough, because in war, tomorrow always came, and with it new challenges, new battles, new chances to prove that momentum was more than tactics. It was survival itself. June 7, 1944, dawn over Juno Beach. Tommy Wright walked the sand where yesterday men had died. The tide had come and gone twice since the landing, washed away the blood, but the evidence remained. Helmets half buried in sand, rifles abandoned in the surf, pieces of equipment scattered like puzzle pieces that would never form a complete picture. He was looking for dog tags, for identification, for proof that the men who fell had names, had families, had lives that mattered beyond being statistics in a battle report. He found one near the waterline. The chain was broken. The metal was still wet. Private David Martinez, Regina Rifles, born 1925, died 1944, 19 years old. Tommy had known him, not well, just enough to know he had a sister in Saskatchewan, that he wanted to be a teacher after the war, that he never got the chance. Tommy pocketed the dog tag, promised himself he would write to the sister. Tell her that David was brave, that his death meant something, even if Tommy was not sure what that something was yet. Other soldiers walked the beach, all Dieppe survivors, all looking for the same thing, closure maybe, or just confirmation that yesterday had really happened, that they had really stormed the most heavily defended beach and survived. One of them approached Tommy. His name was Robert Foster. He had lost 3 fingers at Dieppe. Today his remaining fingers gripped a photograph, his wife and 2 children, smiling, unaware of what war cost. "We paid our debt," Foster said quietly. "For Dieppe. We paid it." Tommy nodded, but thought, "They are still dead. We are still alive." Why? The question had no answer. Never would. Survivor's guilt did not follow logic, did not care about tactics or theories or successful assaults. It just existed. Heavy, permanent. The work ahead would not erase it. Nothing would. They could only carry it. Hope it became lighter with time, knowing it never really did. June 8th through June 15th. The doctrine spread like wildfire through the Allied forces. British commanders formally requested briefings on Canadian tactics. Mackenzie stood in front of maps and charts, explained the mathematics, the timing, the psychology of continuous pressure. Captain Chen demonstrated the modified tanks, showed how each machine solved a specific problem. Barrett translated between American skepticism and Canadian innovation. The British officers listened. Some were convinced immediately, others needed more proof, but all of them recognized that something fundamental had changed. The old certainties about amphibious warfare had been shattered on Juno Beach. One British colonel asked the question everyone was thinking. "This worked once. Will it work again?" Mackenzie looked at him. "It is not about one battle. It is about understanding why it worked. The kill zone is not a place to be careful. That principle applies to every assault, every attack, every time you face an enemy that wants to kill you while you are exposed." The colonel nodded slowly. "You are not teaching us tactics, General. You are teaching us how to think." "Exactly," Mackenzie replied. By June 12th, American units were incorporating 30-second intervals into their training. Barrett wrote a detailed report titled "Tactical Innovation in Modern Amphibious Warfare," submitted it to the U.S. Army War College with a recommendation: immediate curriculum revision. On June 15th, British forces launched their first operation using Canadian tactics, a push toward the city of Caen. Aggressive, fast, unrelenting. It succeeded, not perfectly, not without cost, but it succeeded. The momentum doctrine worked beyond Juno Beach, worked in different terrain, against different defenses. The theory was universal. Mackenzie stood with Nelson, watching reports come in. "Percy, I think we started something." Nelson smiled grimly. "Let us hope we finish it." June 20th. Evening, a forward command post south of Caen. Barrett was preparing to return to the American sector. He found Mackenzie alone, studying maps by lamplight. "Planning the next operation." "Always the next operation," General Barrett said. "I owe you an apology." Mackenzie looked up. "For what I called you a desk general with crazy ideas. I was wrong." Mackenzie shrugged. "You were doing your job. Skepticism keeps us honest." Barrett sat down. "Will you write about this? Your theory, the implementation, how you changed warfare." "No time for that," Mackenzie said. "War is not over. If you will not, I will. The world needs to know." Mackenzie was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "James, if you write about this, do not make me the hero. Write about the men who believed in it when I was not sure I did." "That is exactly why you are the hero," Barrett replied. They shook hands. The American colonel looked at the Canadian general, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried, not just of command, of responsibility, of knowing that his decisions determined who lived and who died. "One more thing," Barrett said. "When we win this war, come visit me in Virginia. I want my son to meet you." "I would like that," Mackenzie said. He meant it, but somewhere deep inside he knew it would never happen. Some men were not meant to survive their moment of greatness. Some were only meant to create it. July 1st through July 7th. Operation Charnwood. The push to capture Caen. Canadian forces were part of the main assault, but this was different from D-Day. Then they had faced surprise defenders on a beach. Now they faced prepared defenses in a city. Urban combat, different rules, harder problems. Mackenzie's momentum doctrine still applied, but in streets and buildings, momentum looked different. You could not just run through. Had to clear, secure, advance. The casualties mounted higher than at Juno Beach. Tommy's unit fought through the suburbs, house to house, room to room, every window a potential sniper position, every doorway a potential ambush. They moved fast. But fast in a city meant different things than fast on a beach. One moment defined the difference. Tommy's squad was pinned down by a German 88mm gun, the same type that had destroyed tanks at range. In a street, it was death itself. Anyone who tried to cross would be cut down. Standard doctrine said to wait, call for support, artillery, airstrikes, wait for someone else to solve the problem. Tommy thought about Dieppe, about Juno Beach, about Mackenzie's words. The danger zone is not a place to be careful. Keep moving, Tommy ordered. Do not stop. They will cut us down, a soldier protested. They will cut us down if we stay here too, Tommy replied. The squad advanced, under fire, zigzagging between rubble, using smoke, using speed, using everything they had learned. One man was hit, then another. But the rest made it across, flanked the German position, silenced the gun. Later, a soldier said to Tommy, "That was crazy," Tommy replied. Crazy is our specialty now. July 8th, 1944, morning. Mackenzie stood in his forward command post, a farmhouse 2 miles from Cannes. Maps covered the table. Staff officers reported on the progress of various units. The battle was going well, not easily, but well. The momentum doctrine was proving itself again. At 9:30, German artillery opened up, a bombardment targeting the Canadian command positions. Shells screamed overhead. The first impacts were distant, then closer, then very close. Get to cover, an officer shouted. Mackenzie was focused on a map, tracing routes, calculating timelines. Did not move fast enough. The shell hit 50 feet away. The explosion was massive. The blast wave threw men across the room. Shrapnel tore through walls. Mackenzie felt something hit his leg, then his back. Hot pain, then cold numbness, then nothing. He was on the floor, did not remember falling. Officers were shouting, hands grabbed him. Lifted him, the plan, he said. His voice sounded far away. Do not stop the plan. Captain Chen appeared. His uniform was covered in dust and blood. Not all of it his own. Sir, you are going to be okay. Mackenzie tried to speak, could not form words. The world was fading, growing dim. The last thing he thought was, not now, not when we are winning. Surgery in a field hospital. Doctors working frantically. The damage was severe. Shrapnel in his leg and back. Internal bleeding. One doctor stepped away, shook his head. Another kept working, refused to give up. Hours passed. Finally, Mackenzie stabilized. Unconscious but alive. When he woke, a doctor stood over him. General, your combat days are over. Mackenzie tried to sit up. Pain exploded through his body. But the war, someone else will finish the war, the doctor said firmly. You have done your part. Inside, Mackenzie screamed, a silent scream that no one could hear, because his part was not done. His theory was proven, but not complete. The war continued, and he would not be there to see it through. July 10th, a hospital in southern England. Mackenzie lay in a bed similar to the one Tommy had occupied 2 years earlier. Different war, same result. Broken bodies, shattered futures, dreams interrupted by metal and explosives. He read reports. Canadian forces still advancing, using his tactics. Operation Atlantic, Operation Goodwood. The momentum doctrine was now standard procedure. Other commanders had taken it and made it their own, improved it, adapted it. The theory no longer needed him. That should have been satisfying, should have felt like success. Instead, it felt like abandonment, like watching your children grow up through photographs instead of being there. Admiral Nelson visited. Robert, you are going home. I should be there, Mackenzie said. His voice was weak. The pain medication made thinking difficult. You are there, Nelson replied. Every attack they make, you are there. That is not what I mean. I know. But it has to be enough. Mackenzie looked at his friend, at the man who had staked everything on supporting him. Is it ever enough? Nelson had no answer. Because the truth was that for men like Mackenzie, it was never enough. They were driven not by glory or recognition, but by the need to finish what they started. And being forced to stop before the end was its own kind of death. August 1944, Mackenzie returned to Canada. There was a parade in Montreal, crowds cheering, bands playing, signs reading Hero of Juno Beach and the General Who Changed D-Day. Mackenzie sat in a wheelchair, uncomfortable with the attention, feeling like a fraud, because the real heroes were still in France, still fighting, still dying. He gave a speech at Parliament. Politicians and journalists and citizens all watching. "I am not the hero," he said. "The men who stormed that beach are. I just gave them permission to be bold. They gave themselves the courage." Applause. But Mackenzie barely heard it. In his mind, he was still at that farmhouse, still planning the next operation, still believing he would see the war through to the end. That night alone in his quarters, he realized something. His war was over. At 42 years old, his war was over. He had given everything he had, changed warfare itself, saved thousands of lives. And now he would spend the rest of his life watching other men finish what he started. Some would call that success. Mackenzie called it incomplete. September 1944 through February 1945. Training Command. Mackenzie taught new officers his doctrine, stood at the front of classrooms, used maps and charts and mathematics, explained the theory, the practice, the courage required to break the rules when the rules were wrong. The students listened intently, took notes, asked questions, and went off to apply the lessons, and Mackenzie stayed behind, teaching the next class, and the next, and the next. He received letters from the front. Tommy wrote, "Sir, we are still doing it your way. Still works. We are in Germany now, every day closer to Berlin. You gave us the key. We are opening the door." Chen sent a photograph. His tank unit somewhere in the Reich. The caption read, "We made it this far. Thank you." Mackenzie kept the letters. Read them late at night when the pain was too much to sleep. They helped, a little, enough to keep going, enough to believe that his injury had not made his contribution meaningless. But they did not fill the empty space, the place where active service used to be. That space remained hollow, a wound that would never heal. May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Mackenzie listened to the radio. Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. Allied forces have achieved total victory. Celebrations erupted across the country, across the world. People poured into the streets, danced, sang, cried with relief and joy. Mackenzie sat in his study, alone. He felt many things. Relief that the killing was done. Pride that his contribution had mattered. Sadness for all those who did not live to see this day. And something else, something harder to name. A sense of disconnection, of watching history happen from the outside. His wife entered. "Robert, you should celebrate." "I am," he said. "In my own way, you are thinking about them. Always." She sat beside him, took his hand. "You gave them a chance. That is all anyone can do." Mackenzie nodded, knew she was right, but knowing and feeling were different things. He had started something on June 6, 1944. One day that changed everything, and that day would define him for the rest of his life. However long that was. 1946, the recognition began. The U.S. Army War College revised its curriculum, added a new course, Momentum Doctrine and Amphibious Warfare, Fort Benning in Georgia, Sandhurst in England, both teaching Mackenzie's tactics. The textbooks were being rewritten. The manual that had killed 3,367 men at Dieppe was being replaced. They rarely mentioned Mackenzie by name, called it the Juno Beach Method, or Aggressive Landing Protocol, or Continuous Wave Assault. The names varied. The principles remained the same. Speed through danger, maintain pressure, never give the enemy time to adapt. Mackenzie did not care about credit, cared that the lessons were spreading, that future soldiers would not die repeating the mistakes of the past. That was enough. Had to be enough. 1947, Barrett published an article in Military Review. The title was Innovation from Unexpected Sources, the Canadian Contribution to Today. It specifically credited Mackenzie, described his theory, his implementation, his courage to challenge doctrine when doctrine was wrong. Barrett sent a copy to Mackenzie with a note. "So the record is clear." Mackenzie wrote back, "Thank you, James. But the real record is in the men who came home." 1948, General Omar Bradley published his memoirs. A Soldier's Story became an immediate bestseller. One chapter was devoted entirely to Juno Beach. Bradley wrote with unusual candor, "I was skeptical of the Canadian approach. I believed their aggressive tactics would lead to disaster. I was wrong. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from those with the most to prove. The Canadians proved everything on June 6, 1944. The book brought Mackenzie's name to public attention. Newspapers requested interviews. Magazines wanted profiles. Mackenzie declined most of them, granted a few out of obligation, but he was not comfortable with fame, had never sought it, did not want it now. What he wanted was to finish what he started, and that was no longer possible. 1949. Mackenzie's health deteriorated. The wounds had never fully healed. Chronic pain became constant pain. Infections came and went. His body was breaking down. The doctor's words were blunt. Your body is paying the price for what happened in France. I cannot stop it. Can only slow it. How long, Mackenzie asked. Years, maybe. Hard to say. But you will not be running any more battles, General. Mackenzie looked at his hands. Once strong, now thin and weak, covered in scars, visible and invisible. It held together long enough. The doctor left. Mackenzie sat alone, thinking about time, about how little of it anyone really had, about how he had spent his on one perfect day in June, one day that had to carry the weight of a lifetime. Was it enough? He still did not know. June 6, 1950, the 6th anniversary of D-Day, a veteran reunion in Ottawa. Thousands attended, men who had been there, who had run across those beaches, who had proven doctrine wrong through courage and blood. Mackenzie attended in his wheelchair. The pain was worse now, constant, but he wanted to see them, the men who had trusted him, who had made his theory real. Tommy approached. He was 25 now, married, a baby on the way. No longer the terrified 17-year-old who had pulled his friend's body across the sand at Dieppe. Life had continued. As it always did, General Tommy said. You saved my life, twice. Mackenzie looked confused. How twice, Juno Beach, obviously. But also you gave me a reason to keep living the after Dieppe. You gave yourself that reason, Mackenzie replied. No, sir. You showed us that failure does not have to be final, that we could learn, adapt, try again, do better. That lesson saved me more than the tactics did. Other veterans approached, each with similar stories. You gave us hope. You believed in us. You trusted us to be brave. Mackenzie listened, accepted their gratitude. But inside he thought, I just wanted you to have a chance, that is all. Just a chance, Chen appeared. Now 37, running an engineering firm in Toronto, doing well. The discrimination had not disappeared, but it had lessened. Harder to question the loyalty of a war hero, Sir Chen said. How are you surviving? Mackenzie replied with a weak smile. And you? Good, very good. Building things instead of destroying them. It feels right. Anyone give you trouble for being Chinese less than before? You did that for me too, sir. Gave me a way to prove I belong. Mackenzie shook his head. You always belonged, Michael. You just needed them to see it. The reunion continued. Stories were told. Old wounds were compared. Laughter mixed with tears. These men had shared something that civilians could never understand, had walked through fire together, had proven themselves in ways that would define them forever. Mackenzie watched them, felt satisfaction. This was why he had done it. Not for medals or recognition or chapters in memoirs, for this. For men who were young and alive and building futures instead of filling graves. It was enough. Finally, it was enough. 1951 through 1953. The quiet years. Mackenzie became increasingly reclusive. The pain made travel difficult, made social interaction exhausting. He stayed home, read, wrote letters to veterans, followed the news. The Korean War had started. American forces were conducting amphibious landings at Incheon. MacArthur was using aggressive timing, rapid deployment, continuous pressure. The tactics were clearly influenced by Juno Beach. MacArthur never credited Mackenzie, but the influence was obvious. Mackenzie did not mind. Ideas belonged to everyone, he wrote in his journal. They should be used, not hoarded. In 1952, a historian came to interview him, writing a comprehensive book about D-Day, wanted Mackenzie's perspective, his insights, his story. Write about the men, Mackenzie said. I was just the one who listened to them. You were the one brave enough to act on what you heard. Or crazy enough. History will decide. The interview lasted 3 hours, covered everything. Dieppe, the theory, the training, D-Day, the aftermath, When it ended, the historian had pages of notes, but Mackenzie felt drained. Talking about the past was exhausting. Living in the present was harder. Spring 1954, the end came quietly. April brought infections, complications, multiple organ failures. The doctors called his family. Time to say goodbye. Mackenzie knew, had known for a while. The body could only take so much. His had taken more than most. Now it was giving up, and he was ready to let it. Admiral Nelson visited, old now, 72, but still sharp. Still the friend who had believed when belief was dangerous. Robert, you changed warfare. We changed it, Percy, you and me, and 14,000 soldiers who believed. History will remember. I do not care about history, Mackenzie said. His voice was barely a whisper now. I care that the men who died at Dieppe did not die for nothing. They did not. Because of you. Tommy came, 30 years old now, 2 children, named his son Robert Thomas Wright. General, I named him after you. Mackenzie had tears in his eyes. Tommy, I do not deserve that. You deserve more than that. You gave me my life back. Gave all of us our lives back. Chen visited with blueprints. Sir, look, I am designing a memorial. For Juno Beach, when it is built, your name will be on it. Mackenzie studied the designs with failing eyesight. It is beautiful, Michael. But put the names of the men who did not come home. They earned it more than I did. May 15th, 1954. Robert Mackenzie died peacefully, 52 years old. His last words to his wife were simple. Tell them it was worth it. The funeral had full military honors. Pallbearers were all Juno Beach veterans. Tommy, Chen, 6 others. They carried a casket in perfect unison, the way they had been trained to move. Together, forward, never stopping. Thousands attended. Bradley sent a wreath with a card. To the man who taught us that courage comes in many forms. A British field marshal sent condolences. An innovator, a leader, a friend. The Canadian Prime Minister spoke. He proved that a small nation can make a big difference, but the words that mattered most came from an unnamed veteran, standing in the rain, watching the casket being lowered. He believed in us when nobody else did. Within weeks, military academies dedicated courses to Mackenzie. The Mackenzie Doctrine became official terminology. In 1955, the first comprehensive textbook was published, Momentum Warfare, Lessons from Juno Beach. In 1956, the Canadian military named a training facility Camp Mackenzie. In 1958, Chen's memorial was completed at Juno Beach. The inscription read, 14,000 landed, 4,000 fell, proved that doctrine is not destiny. Mackenzie's name was listed among the fallen, wounded in service, June 1944. Not separate, not special, one among many, as he had wanted. In 1960, Barrett published a full book, The General Who Changed D-Day. It became a bestseller. Mackenzie's widow read it, cried, told Barrett he would have hated the attention. Barrett replied, but he would have loved that the lessons are spreading. The legacy grew. Business schools began teaching the Mackenzie principle. Speed through disruption zones, applied to markets, products, competition. The military tactics became business strategy. The lessons proved universal. Wars came and went. The Falklands, the Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan. Each incorporated elements of momentum doctrine. Not always successfully. Warfare evolved, changed, but the core principle remained. Speed saves lives. Hesitation costs them. In 2004, on the 60th anniversary of D-Day, Tommy returned to Juno Beach. He was 79 now. Walking with a cane, brought his grandson, showed him the memorial with Mackenzie's name. Was he famous, the boy asked. He should have been, Tommy replied. But he did not care about fame. What did he care about? Us, the men he led. That is all. They stood in silence, looking at the names, 4,000 of them, each one a life, a story, a family that grieved. The price of innovation was never cheap, never easy, but sometimes it was necessary. June 6, 2020, 80th anniversary, Juno Beach. Thousands gathered. Only a handful of veterans remain, the last witnesses, the final voices. Soon there would be no one left who remembered. Only stones and plaques and ceremonies. Mackenzie's great-grandson spoke. I never met my great-grandfather, but I live in the world he helped create, a world where impossible is just opinion, where doctrine is starting point, not destination, where courage means questioning, not just obeying. The crowd listened, young and old, Canadian and American and British and French, all connected by events 8 decades past, all shaped by decisions made in blood and fire and desperation. The camera panned across the memorial wall, 4,000 names, Mackenzie among them, not highlighted, not special, just one name in a sea of sacrifice. A child found something in the sand, a rusted dog tag, brought it to his grandfather. The old man read it. Private Thomas Wright, Regina Rifles. He whispered, "Thank you." Who was he, the child asked. Someone who believed when it was hardest to believe. In what tomorrow? The camera rose, from the beach to the coastline, to France, to the world, showing what those men had died to protect, what Mackenzie had fought to preserve. Not just territory, not just victory, but the chance for tomorrow to be better than yesterday. His words echoed across time. From a journal entry in 19 if this works, maybe we will show them that being underestimated is a gift. It means they will not see you coming until you have already changed everything. The screen faded to black. Text appeared. Dedicated to the 4,000 who fell and the 10,000 who carried their memory forward. Robert Mackenzie proved that the most dangerous men are not the strongest or the fastest or the best equipped. They are the ones who refuse to accept that the way things are is the way things must be. The ones who look at impossible and see opportunity. The ones who have something to prove. On June 6, 1944, 14,000 Canadians had something to prove, and they proved it in 30 seconds of chaos that changed warfare forever. Their general gave them permission to be bold. They gave themselves the courage to act. That lesson lives on in classrooms and battlefields, in boardrooms and laboratories, wherever people face impossible odds and choose to fight anyway. The Mackenzie Doctrine is not just military tactics. It is a philosophy, a way of thinking, a refusal to let convention dictate destiny. 80 years later, his name is carved in stone on a French beach. His tactics are taught in every military academy in the world. His theory has saved countless lives. But Mackenzie died at 52, largely unknown, his body broken by the war he helped win. Was it worth it? That question has no easy answer. Mackenzie paid everything. Lost his health, his future, his chance to see the world he helped create. 4,000 men paid with their lives. 10,000 more carried wounds, physical and mental, for decades. But they won, against impossible odds, against doctrine and convention, and everyone who said it could not be done. They proved that courage and innovation can overcome anything. That being underestimated is the ultimate advantage. That sometimes the right answer is the one nobody considered. The sun sets over Juno Beach every evening. The waves wash away footprints in the sand. Children play where men died. Life continues because men like Mackenzie believed it should. Because soldiers like Tommy trusted when trust was terrifying. Because innovators like Chen built solutions when others saw only problems. Their gift to us is not just the world they saved, it is the lesson they taught. That doctrine is not destiny. That convention is not correctness. That the manual is not Holy Scripture. That sometimes, often, the right thing to do is the thing everyone says cannot be done. Major General Robert Mackenzie, 1902 to 1954, changed warfare, saved thousands, died largely forgotten. But his lesson lives on in every person who looks at impossible and decides to try anyway. Having something to prove is the greatest tactical advantage of all. And that truth, purchased in blood on a French beach 8 decades ago, remains as powerful today as it was then. Because the world always needs people who refuse to accept limits, who question authority, who believe that tomorrow can be better if we have the courage to make it so. Mackenzie gave his soldiers that courage. They gave him their trust. Together, they changed history. And that is a legacy that will never die.